So what I want to talk about in this seminar is just why Catholics bury their dead. You know, when I was appointed director of cemeteries about a year and a half ago, I did not have any cemetery experience, and I do have a couple of degrees in theology. And my first thought is, okay, what is this all about? And so I just have some brief considerations about that. Then we'll get very practical. What decisions do you have to make at the cemetery? There's some basic questions that our cemetery advisors will go over with you, and to help them and help you know what you want. Because if you don't know what decisions need to be made, it's hard to make those decisions. We'll talk about the 4 costs that you'll meet at the cemetery. A brief consideration about when you should make your cemetery arrangements, and then we'll open it up to question and answer. But really, at any time as we're going through this, feel free to jump in and ask me a question. All right, so here we have a picture of the catacombs. You know, Christian burial goes back pretty far, and it really grew out of the Catholic burial tradition grew out of the Jewish burial tradition. So if you look in the book of Genesis, there's a really it's kind of an amusing story about Abraham buying a grave for Sarah. So, you know, this is an at-need purchase. One of the things about at-need purchases, they're urgent, and what that means sometimes is that the person you're bargaining with might take advantage of you, and it seems like that might be what happened in Genesis chapter 23. Abraham's he's a foreigner, and he's trying to get a local to sell him some land where he can bury his wife, and they go back and forth in what might be kind of a passive aggressive way. Oh, I'll give it to you. Oh, I could never take it from you. I'll pay you full price, and back and forth. And I'd love to see the movie version of it. But in the end, he buys a very expensive grave for his wife, and it's so this goes all the way back to the beginning of Judaism. So it's not just Catholics who bury their dead. You look a little further in the Bible, and you look in the book of Tobit. This is one of those books that Protestants don't have in their Bible, but as a director of cemeteries, I really appreciate it because the title character, Tobit, who wrote the book, he got in trouble with the king because the king said, no, Jews can't be buried. And so he would sneak out at night and he would bury his countrymen if they had been killed in the street or something like that. And that was happening. There was anti-Jewish sentiment at that time. And then there's a long, interesting story. And then at the end, it turns out that the angel Raphael had been involved in the story, and he says to Tobit, I saw you when you got up in the middle of dinner and went out and buried, you know, your countrymen, and that was a righteous act before God. And so, you know, in the Catholic tradition, we say burying the dead is a corporal work of mercy. It's the last work of mercy that we can offer to somebody, and I think the roots of that go back at least as far as the book of Tobit. Just last Sunday, we had the reading about Jesus raising Lazarus from the tomb, and I think it's important for us as Catholics to reflect on how Jesus approached death, both those of his loved ones and himself, And the big, like the big point is that the grave is not the end. And that's what St. Paul is talking about when he says, "Oh, death, where is your sting?" Jesus removes the biggest sting of death, even though it is still a sorrowful event. It leaves a hole in our heart and a hole in society. Jesus gives us that promise that this is not the end. The grave doesn't have the last word. And then, to kind of put the exclamation point on it, Jesus enters the tomb himself, and on Easter reveals its temporary nature. And so Joseph of Arimathea had a tomb that he had purchased and prepared, and he was able to give that to Jesus, who didn't have his own tomb. So the big answer to the question, why do Catholics bury their dead? We are imitating Jesus, who was buried. So if we look at the root of the word for cemetery, it comes from the Greek. I'm not going to attempt to pronounce it. I'm pretty rusty on my Greek, but roughly what it means is dormitory, a sleeping place. And you see the way Jesus talks about death is often, he often uses sleep when he means death. So if you look in the book of Mark, the child is not dead but sleeping. That's I think it's the daughter of Jairus, who he raises, the little girl. It says Talitha cum. And also, in the reading from last Sunday, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I go to wake him out of sleep. And at first, his disciples don't understand. Then he has to tell them plainly, he died. So this is just a little bit of background about kind of the Catholic and theological roots of burial. So let's talk about the decisions you have to make at the cemetery. And I wanted to talk about this because if you don't make the decisions before it's too late, your family will end up kind of guessing, and some of them are going to feel strongly that this is what you would want, and maybe somebody feels strongly that no, this other thing is what you want. And on the worst day of their life, that is not a discussion that they should have to have. So the first question is in ground or above ground. Some of our cemeteries have mausoleums that have crypts. Those are above ground spaces. Most of our spots are in the ground, and so that's something that you can think about. Even before you come to the cemetery, you can start thinking about these things. You can also think about whether you would like a full body burial or cremation. The church prefers full body burial. They're very straightforward about that. But cremation is allowed as long as it's not done for anti-Christian reasons. And that's the reason cremation had been prohibited for a long time, was that the enemies of Christianity would burn the bodies of Christians as if to say, resurrect that. And so, but there was never anything intrinsically wrong with cremation. But we have to respect the integrity of the body, so the remains stay together and are laid to rest, just as a regular full body burial would be laid to rest. Another question to consider. Do you want an upright monument or more of a flat marker? And so some of our spots at some of our cemeteries are only one or only the other. And so there will be some limitations based on what you choose there, and that's going to affect you know, both price and location. We have you know, what I like to tell couples you know, who are price sensitive, the most cost-effective way we have of doing 2 full-body burials is what we call our lawn crypt, where we have a double depth vault. So the first spouse who dies would go in the lower one, and then when the next spouse dies, they would go in the upper one. So that's one cost-effective package that we have. And then there's standard graves as well. So if you are choosing above ground, and whether it's full body or cremation, you might have a choice of inside or outside. And again, there's, you know, those are one of the things that our advisors at the cemetery will be able to help you through, let you know what's available and what's not. And then I already mentioned the lawn crypt for couples. You know, a very popular option, the 2 graves side by side. We have double depth crypts, so crypts for 2. If you're going the cremation route, we have niches for 2. There's also a way of doing a single grave with 2 burials. So if the first burial is full body in a casket, the second burial can be a cremation burial. And so we call that the second rite of burial in the same grave, and that's an option that's out there that you can discuss with our advisors. All right, so here's, without further ado, the 4 costs that you're going to encounter at the cemetery: your grave, your vault, your monument, and your burial fees. So the grave is, this isn't our cemetery. This is just a picture I found online. But so graves are a little bit like real estate. Location is going to affect the price, and so prices in Madison are going to be a little bit higher than prices you find out in some of the rural parishes of the Madison Diocese. So you know, the grave, it can also be the crypt or the niche. Then, you know, I was new to cemeteries 1.5 years ago, and I wasn't real clear on what the vault is. The vault is a concrete box that the casket is lowered into, and then it's closed. And the reason we do this, and we require vaults, and most cemeteries require vaults, because if you don't, then as nature takes its course, the ground collapses and becomes very uneven, and it can present safety hazards, and it makes the grass really difficult to mow. So it's all part of, from the cemetery perspective, that's why we require vaults. Monuments. This is a monument at Resurrection Cemetery in Madison. You know, most of our monuments are flat or flush to the ground, but you can do upright monuments, you can do bench monuments. We have different options in bronze, and and this is going to depend a lot on the choices that you made, like we described on the other slide. And then the final consideration is going to be your burial fees. This is what allows us to have the workers on hand to actually dig a hole, keep the grass mowed, and really we're going to be mowing the grass until Christ returns. That's our plan, and so that's built into the burial fees. All right, here's some considerations on when you should make your cemetery arrangements. So cemetery arrangements are a lot like life insurance and wills. These are somewhat technical ways of caring for your family. They're kind of necessities, and if you don't take care of them, somebody else is going to have to take care of them. So it's really an expression of love for your family. So a little bit of inside advice: you should make your cemetery arrangements before you go to the funeral home. We sell some of the same things, and you will find that your nonprofit Catholic cemetery is usually quite a bit more affordable than the funeral home. And so we recently had somebody who discovered that late and went back and had that uncomfortable conversation with the funeral home and said, I don't want to get that from you, I'm going to get that from the cemetery. So come and talk to us first. So what can trigger you to make your cemetery arrangements? Think about, if you're thinking about it like life insurance or your will, if you get married, if your child graduates from college, when you retire, these are major life events. And that might, you might think about it and say, hey, yeah, that's, it makes sense now. I had a son in college, I had a lot of bills, we're finally digging out from that, and now I can take care of these things that I know I'm going to need to take care of. But my main advice is to make your cemetery arrangements ahead of time, and most people do. The fact that you're here on the seminar suggests to me that that you're thinking about it, and that's great. All right, so that's what I got. I think I might have gone. How am I doing on time? We'll see. I had planned to talk for 20 minutes. I just talked for 15 minutes, and I received some questions ahead of time, but I want to open it up for anybody who has some questions to start now. All right. Well, here. I had a question about green burials. This was something that came in by email ahead of the seminar, and I'm not sure if the person who asked me about it is on or not. So a green burial is, it's an attempt to be more environmentally conscious of the impact of burial on the environment. And this is a very Catholic consideration. We understand nature as a gift from God. We are to be stewards of that, and green burial is a way of being a good steward. Right now, at any of the Catholic cemetery, well, at any of the diocesan cemeteries, which are the ones in Madison, Janesville, and Beloit, we can accommodate what they call light green burials. And so we still require the top part of the vault. But you can be in contact with the ground. There's no requirement for a casket. There's no requirement for embalming. Those are all optional things. And so the first green burial that I attended, this was the matriarch of the family had passed away, and she was wrapped in a shroud, and the family had made a quilt that went on top of the shroud, and she was on a trundle, which is just a flat piece of wood, and there were 6 ropes attached to it, and the family brought her over to the grave, and they lowered her right in themselves, and so that was it was really touching. So we can do that already. I have some plans in the works for more natural burials, even than that, where we wouldn't require any part of a vault. What I need to do is set apart a part of the cemetery where we can accept the ground being a lot more uneven, and that's going to affect how we're able to mow, and so we'd probably do some native grasses or something like that. I did get a question about non-Catholic spouses. So I'm Catholic, my wife isn't Catholic. Can she be buried in a Catholic cemetery? Can we be buried together in a Catholic cemetery? The answer is yes. What I like to tell people is, we'll try to get you in. If you know somebody, if you're married to somebody, you have family buried there, no problem. If you don't have anywhere else to be buried, yes, we'll bury you. If you're just driving by and you think this is a pretty cemetery, I would like to be buried here, you're not Catholic, you can become Catholic. I can help you with that. Or we can write a letter to the bishop and see if we can get a dispensation for you. So there's a lot of options, but that's how we go about that. But non-Catholic spouses don't need special permission, that they're already covered under a blanket permission. So I think I've mentioned a second right of burial. So what that means is that you have one grave and you're having a second burial in that grave. And the reason it's said like that, when you buy a grave, you're not actually buying the piece of real estate, you're buying the right to be buried there. And you get the right to bury one body there. And so the next one is a separate, it's dealt with separately. So everybody's dealt with individually. I got a question about Trappist caskets. Somebody wanted to know if that's okay. The Trappists in Iowa, I think, make some beautiful caskets. Is one of the things they do, to make their living. And I know that as they're making the caskets, they're praying over the casket and they're praying for the person who's going to use the casket. And it's really a beautiful thing. And so we absolutely love the Trappist caskets, and so that is no problem, and is actually, if I can encourage that, I would. So that, and then there was a question about, where can a Catholic be buried in another church, in another state? The basic answer is, if your parish has a cemetery, you should be buried at your parish's cemetery, unless there's some other good reason for something else. Each cemetery is going to have its own rules, and so I can't give a blanket, you can be buried anywhere. Catholics can and are buried sometimes in non-Catholic cemeteries, in public cemeteries. And what happens in that case for the faithful Catholic who's being buried like that, the priest will actually consecrate the ground, like consecrate one grave at a time. Which is a little bit, it's an additional part of the rite of committal, and so it's very beautiful. But Catholic cemeteries have been consecrated. We just put a 4 or 5 acre addition onto the Mount Olivet Cemetery in Janesville, and we had Bishop Hyen come out, and he consecrated that portion of the cemetery, and it was a very beautiful ceremony. It was great. I don't know. And then this is a question that I've gotten from different places. I don't think anybody on this seminar asked me this one, but it's a situation we see too often. Is how can I be sure of a Catholic burial if my kids aren't practicing? And I think by planning ahead, making your wishes known, those are your first 2 big steps, because most kids are going to want to honor the wishes of their parents. So then an additional consideration would be make your wishes known, and provide for them, pay for them ahead of time, so that that's not a hurdle that your kids who are not inclined to to share your Catholic faith, that's something that it can lower the barrier, and it makes it more likely.